Good day, folks. This is Shane Hastie for the InfoQ Engineering Culture Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down again with Andrew Lau. Andrew, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Shane, thanks for having me back. It feels like it's been a minute, but I love it from last time. So thanks for having me here.
So the reason we're back is the 2024 State of Engineering Management report.
Yeah, I love it. We've been able to do this for years in a row. It's our fifth annual report. And for me, it's actually super interesting because we get to see changes over time. And this year, we surveyed 600 full-time professionals in software engineering, but not just managers, but contributors and executives. We saw the whole layer there. So it kind of gives us a crosscut in seeing how people perceive the world there.
So the 360 view of the engineering manager.
Yeah.
So what's the state of in a single sentence?
When I step back and look at this, I think it's a reflection of how the world is still in change, right? We are in a world where hiring is still in flux, right? That there's still a shortage of candidates in the market out there. I think there was a theme of AI continually showing up here and really being enforced. And actually, frankly, that there's still a gulf there around what people think is actually happening there, what's actually happening on the field. But also, like, again, back to change, it really comes down to also around how we think about how we do work today. It's a time which the last few years have been pretty tumultuous, right? So you also see the how we work and how we actually engage with our teams. It's just causing a shift through the system, right? So I actually think the State of Engineering Management is really just a snapshot at a time where we're all still trying to figure it out, right? That's the theme I see.
So let's dig into some of these themes. Hiring in flux. There have been reports of job losses and gains, and confusion would be what it looks like from where I sit anyway.
I would agree. And one area that I saw that dovetails with this is 65% of respondents said they experienced burnout in the last year. So this is dovetailing into, staffing shortages, change of work, change of medium that we do work, right? You and I are lucky that we can do this over Zoom, but we're now, 3 years into this hybrid environment, and it's still, we're still learning, right? I think we've proven that we can do it, but is it same warm and fuzzy we were used to? Unclear, right? And you've got economic uncertainty out there, but at the same time, you've got a change and there's still a talent shortage out there. It's like, what a juxtaposition all these things are in.
Burnout. 65% of people reporting burnout. What are organizations doing to help this, or is it just being ignored?
I hope we're helping to it. I mean, so when we actually looked at the survey, we're looking for things that people identified as issues. In this format, we don't fully have all the remediations in place. So I think our role in this is to point out this is an issue, we're still an issue, or increasing it as an issue. I think it's us as a community to figure out how we're going to remediate this and how do we help. I think actually our contribution to this is actually to identify this as a problem. And I think if you don't point out the issues in that way, it's unclear how you'd ever resolve it. And I think this is one of those things where I think as individuals, it's hard to perceive sometimes that burnout's in place because we're all on this journey together. We've gone through a pandemic. We've gone through economic crises. We're dealing with work idiom changes. We're dealing with AI and movement and changing the way we work. And so at the very least, each of us are crossing these thresholds alone. Some of us may have resolved it and figured out how to negotiate the waters, but this is a reminder that 2/3 of our collective community has not figured this out. And so to your question, how do we solve it, or how are we going to solve it? I think step one is to talk about it. Step one is to figure out what's working for who and why, and then maybe we can find solutions here.
And that's embracing AI or not. You made the point, the gulf between perception and reality. What is the perception and where's the reality?
Yeah. So first of all, your audience knows this, but we're at a time where generative AI, LLMs, copilots, agents, they're all in flight. And I think all of us are dabbling with it, if not fully in it, right? You've seen it, in the media, you've seen this thing. And I think intuitively, I think everybody thinks there's going to change things. I think, on a positive side, you look at some of this stuff, you're like, it's magic. It's amazing what it actually can do. But there's also a fear side of it, which is like, what is it going to do to me and my role? And where do I fit into this stuff, right? There's this strong juxtaposition of it. So I think deep down, we all intuit this is happening. And so there is a gulf out there, right? So we actually surveyed executives like, hey, are you using generative AI here? And 76%, 3/4 of folks said, yes, we are. Okay. In that same environment, though, we actually asked those related engineers, are you using it? And the answer was only half, 52% said we were using it. So there is a gulf there, right? Around perception of usage and actual usage on that stuff. And that is the gulf that I'm talking about. But I think if you ask the whys, it actually goes back to my first comment around what's actually happening here. There's this fear juxtaposition going on here, right? So I think if you talk to an average business person, I think they look at this as an imperative to be using AI, right? So I think there's two things going there. As a business person, there's fear and greed in play, right? So the greed part of it is like, imagine what could happen. I see all this magic happening. If I could apply this magic pixie dust to my company, my business, either I'm going to get more efficient or magic things will come out of this machine. So there's let's push into it just for the greed factor. Let's try it. Like, see what's going to happen. And then the fear factor on that is like, if I don't do it, my competitor or my industry is going to do it and we're going to be left behind, right? So I think there is a business imperative to capture, bottle, utilize whatever is actually happening in this world of generative AI. Now, on the other side of it, you look at the folks making the engineering team and like, they're the ones that use this. They're often the ones that identify the magic, see it first. But there is a time of like juxtaposition and change and fear. Like, what is this going to do with my role in this? What does this actually mean? Is it actually any good at these things? And so I think that is the gulf of reluctance in that space, which is the intention and who's affected by this is some of this catalyst here. My observation, though, is it's not like this change isn't coming. It is. Because I assume, Shane, you're like, what do we do about it as an industry here? It's true. But you and I have seen how this movie goes. You can't stop the progress of technology in this stuff. It's coming. So I think to me, the worst thing to do is put our fingers in our ears and like just pretend it isn't happening. I would say instead, you have to acknowledge and capture that fear and figure out how you're going to utilize it. As opposed to letting it happen to us, I think we have to drive it to be conducive to us in that space. My intuition is it will drive change. I think everyone's intuition will drive change. I'm just saying, just putting your fingers in your ears isn't going to actually stop the change. We have to embrace, engage, and drive it to a thing that is actually conducive to helping us make progress here, is my 2 cents on it.
And how do we do that? And this is outside of the report, but how do we do that ethically?
Well, ethically in terms of who, right? So you could talk about roles changing. You could talk about rights holders of the content. There's many layers of what ethically can mean. And I'd probably have to tackle all of them, but which one were you referring to?
A broad general view on it, but also making sure that the change is good, not just for the individual, for the organization, but for society as a whole.
Ooh, that's some deep thinking there. Look, I hope that we're making progress in society as a whole. I think there's a lot of dark things that people could imagine on that stuff. We have to look at it in the spectrum. I think I still fit into the same statement here. I think if you fear tough things actually happening here, still the answer is to not put your fingers in your ear, ignore it, right? Because someone else will capture it and drive it forward, right? I think this is where technology progress happens. I would say engage with it where you actually steer it towards the good use cases, I think, right? And however you define good in this case and away from the bad. Because if you just ignore it and hope the bad doesn't happen, actually, unfortunately, that I think there's a bit of that does happen. So, if you were talking about, people abusing the usage of it or hackers, well, maybe engage with it to try to figure out, the counter case and how to make it to prevent that, right? You look at AIs to detect AI usage or so look at it the other way. So I think, again, you've got to lean into it to actually help solve the problem. You didn't jump on it, but I'll say the other couple of things that I have heard, I posited too. One is actually like kind of rights holders and all this stuff. And I think every nation state is going to be putting on rules in place on this stuff. And you're seeing actually in the US here, some of the litigation start to actually happen on the media consumer side with respect to this. And I think that'll blaze the trail and answer that question there. So I think that there will be rules set in place by how legal treatment of what you can train on, not just what can you actually synopsis, right? This is going to be things that are answered in the consumer with big media perspective. And the other one is I think we talk ethically around change of roles. And I think that's probably the one that is probably closest to and most germane to the community that you and I are part of here in this. And I think there is changes coming here where, for example, our collective roles will start to shift. And so let's look at a software engineer. Like, I actually think that increasingly, it's not binary, but it'll shift, right? The act of raw coding will start to change and start shifting, where more of the code generation will be coming from these agents and co-pilots and things. And so the role will shift more to review. And furthermore, I think we're going to up-level more and actually probably live in a world where software engineers more like bubble architecture. And maybe, right, as software engineers, we're going to become more like product managers, because if we're doing bubble architecture, then you actually ask if the code's doing something and how are we actually going to fulfill or whatever goal we're trying to figure out. We have to ask you, like, what's the goal of this thing we're making, right? Is it fulfilling that person or that need or that system, regardless of whatever your aspiration is in that space? And so software engineers, maybe we start becoming more like product managers in some ways. And again, I am cartooning this a little bit, right? And I had a friend we were just talking about this weekend, right? Like he and I, probably started out, maybe touching assembly, a little bit of C. And in some ways, we were actually having the same rhetorical discussion maybe 30 years ago here around like, what's going to happen here? Is this skill going to go away? And maybe there's echoes of that too, right? Where actually, what happened in that evolution? Well, frameworks came into play. And if you look at the way that a lot of folks are developing today, it's a higher level construct than we're actually doing down in assembly or C. And now it's actually just even going further high level in that case. And it's more of an orchestration, product manager, bubble architect kind of way. But it isn't to say that, like, in today's world, if you actually still coded assembly in C, you're probably a special skill set that is actually pretty sought after too. So it's possible you see a parallel shift here in that case. And if that's true, then like if you draw that analogy, if you believe that analogy for a little bit, then maybe we should learn the new framework today. We should engage with it. We should actually, or dig in and decide you're going to be that C assembly level programmer and go deep in that space. But I think there might be lessons from history here that we can learn here that might play out. Or you can believe me or not. I could be making up stories here. I don't know.
Well, I certainly, looking back on my own career, like you, I was in assembler, COBOL, and C, and stepped into frameworks, and haven't written much code in a while, but at least still enough to understand. One of the things that does concern me, makes me wonder, and this is a theme I've asked a few of our speakers recently, is as we step into these frameworks, experienced engineers can do that easily. How do we help novices to have the base knowledge, or do they not need it?
Yeah, okay. It's interesting. I actually probably take an opposite posture. I would actually argue that it is much, with these tools. I mean, look, I'm sure you play with the chat GPTs and all the, it's actually pretty easy to engage with it because the language is very easy to access. Or if you look at Copilots, you're already in the IDE, that it's just coming back to you with the lingua franca. I would actually argue the engagement vehicle is actually easier today than it was. I'll posit a more interesting thought. And someone brought this to me earlier, which is like, look, if you look at the way that you and I might have started our careers, there was a little bit of an apprenticeship path, right? Like you fix the bugs first, right? You fix someone else's bugs and then you got better at doing that. And then you started writing your own, and maybe you reviewed the guy or gal that was next to you, reviewed their code, and You started at the lower level pieces, and then you kind of moved up to eventually being an architect. You kind of orchestrated a few modules together and these things. That is, there was a pathway of learning on that part of it. The question is, if the rudimentary low-level bug fix or the basic block of code is no longer the thing you need to do, what is the training path for us to become more seasoned over time? And maybe the answer doesn't matter. Maybe you just start at the higher level construct and it's fine, right? Because we're sort of frameworks on up. But it is interesting, right? Like we come up through a profession which has seen that evolution. And what do we do here?
Interesting thoughts. It's going to be fun to watch things play out.
Yeah. Fun is right. I mean, look, at the same time, like we see this actually in this discussion, you see this gulf around how business people think actually we should be executives be believing the team has embraced AI, and then 3/4 there and only half of the engineers think so. So I said the gulf was intention. The other one too is I actually think that we haven't agreed upon what's actually going to happen here, right? So you and I are kind of riffing on what's the theorized kind of big picture, longer term part of it. But I think we're actually not able super well today to even measure and talk about what are the effects today, right? So one reason is it's fast moving. This is an area that we spend some time on and thinking about. Right now, there's no widely adopted way to measure and manage this AI adoption part of it. So we're spending a lot of time in that area because it's so fast and changing there. But also without of actually the empirical way to actually do this, I think you end up with these gulfs because no, we're just clear exactly what are we doing and why are we doing this? And so I think that's a rapid regression we're going to be seeing down the path here. And we're spending some time in there around kind of measuring kind of co-pilot impacts and stuff like that.
Digging back into the reports and the metrics, what are useful metrics that tell us about engineering and engineering management today?
Well, I actually think back to the actual shortage of candidates, right? And I am jumping back to that a little bit, right? So the two call-outs for me around burnout and candidate hiring are to me, a little bit the surprising part of it. 2/3 of folks are still burnt out. I think it's important if you're an engineer manager, if you're in leadership in that space, to realize that 2/3 of your folks are kind of baked. And to a certain degree, we think that like, oh, we're through this pandemic, we're doing all these things, everything's like fine and easy, like it's not true, right? We're all getting pounded constantly, pounded with changes, pounded with crises, pounded with changes in patterns. So as a manager, be empathetic. Like that's like a take home. Ask, are your people doing okay? What do they need help with? I mean, this is classic management stuff, but it's a time that's really important. So I think that is one that to me is a little off intuition that I think leads to some action here. The other one is around qualified shortage of hiring. So we just saw, in the last 4 years, pandemic, and so hiring stopped, and then a huge surge of go 21 hiring, and then I think some more kind of economic challenges recently. So it's a pullback, and I think a lot of us are in the trenches actually in hiring, and you're like, oh, it seems like the hiring's got a pullback, so it can't be a thing. But we're still seeing 6 out of 10 companies are still like reporting a shortage of the right candidates there, and so this again an off intuition thing. And so that means that like, look, you're investing time in your team, in training them, investing in them, building a team together, right? So, again, to be empathetic to your team members, don't let them burn out and walk out on you. The other one too is like to invest in those folks and grow them, because it's still hard to find folks, even though you might think the economic climate shifted. It might be easier in that case. It is still hard out there. And the team members too, like to stand up and to have some pride in themselves too, like they're doing something special there. And so for the right candidates, it's still a candidates market in that regard. The people still are not feeling like they're finding the right best people always out there. To me, those are things that ring home around being a manager in the state of today, which is in some ways, both of those are off intuition, and neither of those comments have to do with AI, right? And I think they are actionable, and they come back to, I think, respecting your team, right? I think that's a simple message there.
And pragmatic, practical ways of improving or supporting high performance in teams. What can the manager do?
I mean, I sound old school here, but like I think it's ask your team, clear roadblocks, but also to communicate to make sure that everybody's on board around what direction you're going. What are you trying to get done? Like, what is the business impact we're here doing? And actually, like, as much as we're talking about the dichotomy of executives, manager, we survey the whole ball, right? In some ways, it's an interlinked group of people. I'm just separating it up for this discussion here today in that part of it. And I think it's important to remember that this team is there to actually accomplish business goals, right? I think it's easy to talk about these things at odds. They're not at odds. We're still trying to actually make this. And the one thing that actually was really important that I saw there is that over 90% of folks actually said that their engineering team is actually shaping business strategy. That's huge. And so like, look, as someone that started out as an engineer, is in the engineering industry, I love it. They said software ate the world. It's true, right? 94% of teams actually said that their engineering is helping the business grow. Okay. So software ate the world. Every company's a software engineering today. They're looking to the software engineering team to define business strategy, a strategic partnership. Okay. I mean, I'm proud because we've gotten to where we should be, right? This is the big show, right? We're driving the business, but that also means that we're pushing for a business outcome. So I think actually as a leader, back to your earlier question, what do we do here? We have to make sure high performance teams know what they're playing for. It's not just blindly doing stuff. It's not like CD for the sake of CD. No, we're actually trying to accomplish a business objective and make a dent out there. So congratulations, engineering team. You've got the hand on the wheel. You are setting business strategy today. Okay. Now, with the pressure's on, you've got to steer the ship, right? You can't just press the pedal down for kicks and go fast. You are going somewhere, right? And so as a leader, as a manager, you're really the bridge to the business. And so really kind of setting that stage and figuring out how to point the team. And so I actually think to be a high-performing team, you have to be going somewhere. And as a leader, you articulate and connect, where are we going? And that's the ultimate measuring stick, which is, it's not that you're blindly going fast, or we're going fast to our business objective. I think that's the biggest role that a leader has in this.
A lot of really interesting points. We've had a wide-ranging discussion, which I really appreciate. What's one piece of advice for the engineering manager today?
Oh, I think in this time, my simple one is to figure out how you are going to harness AI, not AI harness you.
And if people want to continue the conversation, where do they find you, Andrew?
You can find me at AMLAU on X, and you can drop an email. I'm happy to do that, or catch me as AMLAU on LinkedIn too. All three of those work.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Shane, thank you for making time. This has been great.